Hi, my name is Jakaia Lester, and today I'm going to be sharing and presenting my final presentation over my chosen topic of discussion, which is gender conceptions of sexuality. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So the overview in today's overall objective is to discuss the classification of sexuality, both socially, traditionally, and psychologically. We're also going to examine gender roles for sexual behavior, as well as stereotypes assigned to both men and women. And we're also going to take a look into double standards revolving and centering around gender. So, with classifying sexuality, the study of sex and human sexual behaviors has fascinated researchers for years. Over here, we also have a few terminology to help us understand sexual behavior and sexual identity a little bit more. And I do apologize, I'm currently getting over a cold. So, sexology is defined as the scientific study of human sexual behaviors, including their interests, actions, and functions. Next, we have sexuality, which is an individual's identity to the gender or genders to which they are typically attracted to. And lastly, we have gender, which refers to the characteristics of women, men, girls, and boys that are socially constructed. And then over here, we have the 5 components of sexuality. So, sexuality is made up of sexualization, intimacy, sensuality, sexual identity, as well as sexual health and reproduction. We also have the term sexual dichotomy, which is the traditional belief that an individual is either heterosexual or homosexual. And we also have those definitions as well. So, heterosexuality is defined as the romantic or sexual attraction or behavior between people or of the opposite sex or gender. Whereas homosexuality refers to the sexual interest and or attraction to members of one's own sex. And then to debunk the theory of sexual dichotomy, researcher Alfred C. Kinsey wanted to challenge cultural and societal perceptions of sexuality. In doing so, the Kinsey scale was created as a tool for research on sexual behavior and to present the spectrum of sexuality. So on the next side of this presentation, we have a chart presented, which is the Kinsey scale. And in this scale, we have different different levels of how we are going to identify sexuality or how one would identify. So on our lowest level at a 0 or a level 1, we have someone who is exclusively heterosexual. Further down into these levels, we also begin to see people who either identify as both homosexual and heterosexual, as well as people who just identify as homosexuality. But even with just those ranges between being heterosexual, homosexual, or bisexual, there are also still other pieces that fall into those, as of course, as we see with level 2 or level 3, level 5, level 6, where we also have people who either fully identify as being heterosexual or homosexual, but still at times are incidentally one or the other. So next we're going to get into the gender roles for sexual behavior. So, sexual attitudes, behaviors, and interactions are affected by cultural and social norms. Embedded with these norms for sexual behavior are gender role expectations. In addition to that, we also have double standards for sexual behavior, also known as SDS. This presumes and encourages sexual behavior for men, but not women, which of course pressures men to engage in occasional risky behavior while then shaming women for freely expressing their sexuality. So, our sexual double standards, which also, of course, fall right in line with our gender role expectations. So, some stereotypes or expectations that we have associated with men is that men should be dominant initiators of sex. Men can also be sexually adventurous. Men should also be emotionally restrained. And again, referring back to sexual dichotomy, it's usually inferred that men are either heterosexual or homosexual. Some stereotypes associated with women. Women should serve as being submissive receivers of affection. Women are also gatekeepers for sexual behavior, so they should be sexually modest. Women who do freely express their sexuality are labeled as sluts, and women who are too emotionally sensitive or involved in sex are usually also somehow deemed as being problematic. And because these gender roles create an exaggerated perception of sex differences in experiences, this is how we then begin to see stereotyping, expectations, gender bias, and of course, double standards emerging. So, in conclusion, traditional social and cultural ideologies involving sexual behavior shape and influence the gender role bias, expectations, and misconceptions associated with sexuality. In order to debunk these harmful stereotypes and discrimination against all individuals or how they choose to sexually identify themselves, we first have to look at the exaggerated perceptions and representations that we see of individuals in the media, and what we're taught in our home life, traditional values, customs, etc. Those have to be corrected. And without the proper knowledge being addressed on sexual behavior, sexual identity, or sexuality, this will only further set the precedent to over sexualize women, to sexually discriminate anyone who identifies as LGBTQ or, of course, even heterosexual. And this also further intensifies the pressure to conform to gender roles. And then lastly, I have our works cited page where most of my work was cited from our book in Psychology of Sex and Gender, as well as some other third party sources. Thank you so much, and I hope that you've enjoyed this presentation.